The Ascension of K, or K's Drowning. By Motojiro Kajii. From your letter, it seems that you have been tormenting yourself with every possible question about K's drowning, whether it was an accident or suicide, if suicide, what drove him to it, whether perhaps he despaired of an incurable illness and chose to die. I suppose that is why you came to write to me, though I was a complete stranger to you and knew K for only about a month after meeting him by chance on the coast of N, a health resort. It was only through your letter that I learned K had drowned there. I was deeply shocked. At the same time, I thought, K has finally gone to the world of the moon. I would now like to tell you why such a strange thought occurred to me. It may, I believe, offer one key to the mystery of his death. I cannot remember exactly when it was, but it was the first full moon night after I arrived at N. Because of my illness, I was quite unable to sleep at night in those days. That night too, I finally got out of bed. The moon was shining, so I left the inn and made my way to the beach, treading through the scattered shadows of pine trees. Fishing boats hauled ashore and windlasses used to haul and the seine nets cast sharp shadows upon the white sand. Otherwise, there was not a person in sight. It was low tide, and rough waves came booming in, breaking beneath the moonlight. I lit a cigarette, sat down on the stern of a fishing boat, and gazed out at the sea. The night was already far advanced. After a while, when I turned my eyes toward the beach, I discovered that there was one other person on the sand besides myself. It was K. At the time, however, I did not yet know who he was. It was later that same night that we first exchanged names. Now and then I glanced back at the figure. Gradually, I began to find him strange. He, K, was perhaps 30 or 40 paces away. He was not looking at the sea. With his back completely turned to me, he would walk forward across the sand, then backward, then come to a stop, doing nothing but repeating those movements. I thought he might be searching for something he had dropped. His head was bent forward, as though he were staring intently at the sand. Yet he never crouched down, nor did he sift the sand with his feet. Although the full moon made the beach quite bright, he showed no sign of striking a light to examine the sand more closely. I would look out at the sea, then turn my attention to the figure again. My unease steadily mounted. At last, taking advantage of the fact that he never once looked back but continued his movements with his back entirely toward me, I began to watch him without interruption. A mysterious shudder passed through me. I felt that something was drawing him. I turned toward the sea and began to whistle. At first I did so unconsciously, but then I thought it might have some effect upon the figure, and my whistling became deliberate. I began with Schubert's By the Sea. As you know, it is a setting of a poem by Heine and one of my favorite songs. Then I whistled another Heine setting, the Doppelganger, or the Double, as one might call it. It too was a favorite of mine. As I whistled, my mind grew calmer. He has dropped something after all, I thought. How else could one account for the movements of that strange figure? Then another thought occurred to me. He does not smoke, so he has no matches. I have some. Whatever he had dropped must be very precious. I took my matches in my hand and began to walk toward him. My whistling had produced no effect. He continued as before, advancing, retreating, stopping. He seemed not even to notice my approaching footsteps. Suddenly I started. He was treading upon his shadow. If he had lost something, he ought to have turned so that his shadow fell behind him and searched the sand toward me. The moon, a little off the zenith, cast my own shadow upon the sand, about a foot long. I was certain there was something behind all this, yet I continued toward the figure. When I was some 12 to 18 feet away from him, I summoned my courage and called out. "Have you lost something?" I called rather loudly, holding up the matches in my hand as if to show them. If you have lost something, I have matches. That was what I meant to say next. But once I had realized that he did not seem to be searching for a lost object, the words were simply an excuse to speak to him. At the sound of my first words, he turned toward me. I had unconsciously been imagining a faceless apparition, and so this was a terrifying moment for me. Moonlight glided over the high bridge of his nose. I met his deep gaze. Then his face took on a somewhat embarrassed expression. No, nothing. His voice was clear, and a smile hovered about his lips. This strange incident was how K and I first came to speak. From that night onward, we became close. After a while, K and I returned together to the stern of the fishing boat where I had been sitting, and I said something to this effect. What were you really doing? Little by little, K explained it to me. At first, however, he seemed somewhat hesitant. K told me he had been watching his own shadow, and that watching it was like opium. It must sound as outlandish to you as it did to me. With the sea before us, beautifully aglow with phosphorescent plankton, K slowly began to tell me what lay behind his strange behavior. Nothing, K said, was as mysterious as a shadow. Try it yourself and you will surely experience it. Gaze steadily into your shadow, and little by little the semblance of a living creature begins to appear within it, though it is, of course, your own form. Ordinary electric light will not do. Moonlight is best. Why, I cannot say. My own experience has led me to believe it, though perhaps it is true only for me. Even if moonlight is objectively best, the reason must be exceedingly profound. How could the human mind fathom such a thing? This was K's way of speaking. He trusted his own sensations above all and left their mysterious origin beyond explanation. When you stare at your shadow cast by moonlight, the presence of a living creature begins to emerge within it. One reason may be that moonlight consists of parallel rays, so the shadow cast upon the sand is the same shape as your body, but that much is obvious. A short shadow is best. 1 or 2 feet, I think. It is better to remain still, because that helps to concentrate the mind, but the shadow itself should move a little. That is why I was walking forward, stepping back, and stopping. Shake your shadow as a grain merchant shakes a tray of red beans while searching for bits of debris. Then stare and stare into it. In time, your own figure gradually becomes visible. Yes, it passes beyond the realm of a mere presence and enters the domain of the visible. After telling me this, K asked, "Weren't you whistling Schubert's The Doppelganger a little while ago?" "Yes, I was," I replied. So he had heard it after all, I thought. My shadow and the doppelganger, on moonlit nights, I become possessed by those two things. Once you grow accustomed to the feeling that comes from seeing something not of this world, the real world begins to feel wholly alien to you. That is why I feel as languid as an opium smoker during the day. That was how K described it. K went on to explain that one's own form became visible, but that this was not the only marvel. As the figure gradually emerged, the self within the shadow began to acquire a personality of its own. At the same time, the self outside the shadow felt more and more remote. Then, at a certain moment, the soul, if that was what it was, would begin to rise smoothly toward the moon. It would travel back along the rays streaming down from the moon and ascend toward the heavens with a feeling beyond description. As K spoke, his pupils remained fixed upon mine, and he appeared to be under intense strain. Then, as if a thought had occurred to him, he smiled and the tension eased. There is that passage where Cyrano reels off the various ways of reaching the moon, isn't there? This is one more method. But, as Jules Laforgue says in a poem, alas, so many Icaruses come tumbling down. No matter how many times I try it, I fall too. K laughed as he said this. From the night of that strange first meeting onward, we visited each other every day and went walking together. As the moon waned, K ceased going to the sea so late at night. One morning, I was standing by the sea to watch the sunrise. K, perhaps having risen early too, came to the same place. When we saw a boat row into the reflected light of the sun, he suddenly asked me, "Isn't that backlit boat a perfect silhouette?" I suppose K saw a paradoxical proof in it. If a solid boat could look like a silhouette, then a shadow could also appear solid. "You're quite absorbed in this, aren't you?" I said. K only laughed. K also possessed several life-size silhouette pictures, made, he said, by the light of the sun rising directly before him over the morning sea. And he told me this story. When I lived in the dormitory at my higher school, there was a beautiful boy in another room. Someone had used an electric lamp to cast his seated figure onto the wall as he worked at his desk, then painted the shadow itself in ink. It was extraordinarily vivid. I often went to that room. K told me this as well. I never questioned him about it, but that silhouette may have been where it all began. When I read in your letter that K had drowned, the first image to arise in my mind was the strange sight of K from behind on the night we first met. And at once I thought, K has climbed to the moon. And the day before K's body was found washed ashore had unquestionably been a full moon night, had it not? I have just opened the official almanac and verified it. During the month or so I spent with K, I sensed nothing else that might have given him a reason to take his own life. Yet while I regained a measure of health during that month and became well enough to decide to return here, K's illness seemed gradually to advance. I remember that his eyes grew steadily deeper and clearer, his cheeks more hollow, and the high bridge of his nose more starkly prominent. K said that a shadow was like opium. If my intuition is right, then the shadow took K from us. But I do not cling to that intuition. Even to me, it is only a possibility to consider. The true cause of death remains completely obscure to me. Nevertheless, using that intuition as a starting point, I shall try to reconstruct, provisionally, what happened on that unhappy full moon night. The lunar age, that is, the number of days since the new moon, was 15.2 days that night. Moonrise was at 6:30 p.m., and the official almanac records 11:47 p.m. as the time when the moon crossed the meridian and reached its highest point. I think K walked into the sea at about that hour. When I first saw his back on the beach on that other full moon night, it too was around the time when the moon was highest. And if I carry the conjecture one step further, I imagine that K entered the sea when the moon had begun to incline slightly westward. If so, K's shadow, which, as he said, was 1 or 2 feet long, would have fallen northward, though somewhat east of due north, and K, following it, would have walked diagonally across the shoreline and into the sea. I imagine that, as his illness advanced, K's mind grew exceptionally sharp. That night, the vague presence within his shadow may have sharpened into a visible figure, first shoulders, then a neck, and finally a head. As this happened, a faint dizziness came over him. At a certain moment, K's soul may have begun to rise toward the moon, moving against the flow of moonlight. His body would then have slipped gradually from the control of consciousness, while its unthinking steps carried it closer and closer to the sea. The self in the shadow would at last have acquired a distinct personality. As K's soul climbed higher, his empty shell, guided by that shadow self, may have walked into the sea like a mechanical doll. Then a high wave at low tide knocked him into the water. If feeling had returned to his body then, his soul would have returned with it. Alas, so many Icaruses come tumbling down. K called that a fall. If it had been a fall this time as well, he should not have drowned, for K knew how to swim. The wave knocked K's body down and carried it offshore. Sensation had not yet returned. The next wave dragged him up onto the beach. But sensation did not return. He was pulled out to sea again, then hurled back against the shore. All the while, his soul continued its ascent toward the moon. In the end, his body never regained sensation. The almanac records low tide at 11:56 p.m. Abandoning his empty shell to the violent waves of that hour, K's soul flew away, toward the moon, toward the moon.
The Japanese Mystery Library. Classic mysteries from Japan in English. Subscribe to hear the next story.